Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Ma.K at YouTube with another model build. Today we're going to be completing a Maschinen Krieger diorama in 1/20th scale for Lincoln's Paint on Plastic Facebook group Ma.K competition group build. Instead of utilising Wave or one of the other manufacturers' kits and original designs, we shall be kit bashing our own mechanised suit utilising various 3D printed parts, which we'll see downloaded via this video and produced from the Spark Maker 3D printer, utilising some not so desirable resin. Being the last of our monocure resin, which overexposes quite easily and stays a bit tacky, we're still able to get enough definition from Beast Mech arms scaled down and Space Marine legs scaled up to fit the same torso of junk vintage Gunpla bits and lots of milliput sculpting to get that organic, smooth, rounded off surfaces. Having a hunt around on Thingiverse, we also found a sculpted 3D figure of a schoolgirl, scaled that utilising heights off the scale model calculator on Google and the general height of people, and a really nice elderly Asian man bust that would fit inside the hatch or the helmet of this mech. I think the 3D printing medium in SLA or at least resin would be very handy for this unusual scale of 1/20, where figures in resin are normally quite expensive. The overall weight and cost, even with not so popular resin, would only be about $10 to $15. However, utilising what I have left over, with enough sanding, cleaning up and washing in solvents, it was still acceptable and polished up nicely for the finished result. The two models did warp slightly by the support bases splitting from the platform and hanging by a few mil. The supports, some of them did fail, leaving the arms and legs to be slightly pocked. The figures themselves had a few stepped lines. All of this, after curing, was very easy to sand and extra putty built up. As we were chopping up Gunpla bits with an ultrasonic knife, gluing it and heavily puttying it up for that organic round look, lots and lots of filling putty and seam putty was required. The sanding between the scratch building and the 3D printing was about equal and tolerable. In my future 3D printing attempts and endeavours, I'm not going to tolerate this as much and will be swapping to a different resin product, making this truly a junk scrap build all the way down to the printing medium resin. Inspiration from some old Hobby Japan model graphic magazines. A ping pong ball was chopped up to do the leg side armour and bulked up with putty. These ping pong balls were bought many years ago for this attempt. It's quite funny that they turned up when they did. It was really convenient being able to download mechanised legs straight off online and then scaling it later on to suit. It was just a lot of fun pulling out all sorts of junk bits, seeing if they fit in the whole scheme of things and fattening it out with the putty. It was multiple stages of just filling in certain parts and building it out where it feels right creatively. Due to the solid nature of this build, I treated it a lot like a resin garage kit where a lot of components were drilled and pinned, going more for a 5mm pipe rather than the usual 2-3mm brass rod, which fit everything together quite nicely, giving the arms a bit of posability and articulation for later storytelling in the layout of the pose. I was able to make it stand and look at the whole presentation, adding slightly detail of extra bumps and parts that would fit all over the place and puttied closer. During this time, multiple layers of primer were applied to look for any seam marks, joining marks, undesirable putty sculpting marks and small pinholes where they were filled with a rougher filler, sanded back and sprayed again, and later on going to the mist or dissolved putty for the final touch up and a very nice, smooth, refined look in the finished product. Inside the cockpit cavity of the mech, it was drilled out and dremeled for a large enough space to fit the bust of the old man, as well as the lid or the helmet to be hollowed with the Dremel piece. Once enough space was created and I was able to fit the 3D printed component, putty was applied in so it sat in quite snug and nicely, making the shoulders blend inside to extend its arms out, and the head could fit in quite comfortably and enough of the painted face was visible. For the rest of the surface of the mech, tactical Gunpla and 72nd military parts were pulled out and decorated for natural looking detectors, hatches, holes, sensors and pipe work to bulk it up and give it more of that detailed mark look and aesthetic. Naturally, the extra details superglued all over the hull were reinforced and welded together with Mr. Dissolve putty to look like a seamless single piece and naturally belonging. Another note is the Gatling gun at the end of the arm was sourced from a smaller PVC Gundam kit. Suited it quite perfectly. All of that done and enough primer applied for a really smooth and natural model kit look, we went straight to airbrushing. This was done at my workplace with the portable wireless 0.3mm airbrush and lacquer paints. Going for a Japanese Imperial or Self-Defense Force theme, I got the old Imperial late war colour set and did a Type 97 or Type 95 scheme with that iconic yellow streak as tips around the sensors and other bits, again for that shaded mark look. The usual decal and weathering scheme of a sludge wash, bit of detailing, a touch of hand painting, finished it all up with multiple layers of clear coat and definition added through weathering methods. Each of the camouflage colours was freehand airbrushed 3 tones, extra liquid black for undershading. It's refined-ish, but not as fine as some of the magazine works I've seen around. A lot of extra work before we get that exact doom and gloom Maschinen Krieger appeal and feel. Pretty happy regardless. On the other hand, how deep the detail was for the figures printed actually quite nicely. Once hardened and treated under UV light, we've hit it with a fairly rough sandpaper to get rid of all the step lines and polished it up a bit. No putty was really required. Hitting it with a primer, we airbrushed the flesh tones with Mr. Colour Flesh and the new Lascivous tones, hand painted all the other uniform components or clothing and shaded it a bit with a touch of wash weathering and a few coats of matte clear to define it into the whole diorama setting of snow. The old man, I'm really happy how that popped out as a bust. Moving on to the diorama, the story I wish to tell is a winter tundra look or winter hitting a city. We have a crowd barrier making it look like it's near a town or metropolitan setting. A few diorama accessories were sourced, such as a fuel tank, and scaled up appropriately. I cut it up and drew the crowd barrier based off dimensions I found on Google for existing models. All of it was printed, treated in the usual method of soaking in solvents and sanding it up. It was a bit damaged, so we gave it a battle damaged effect, or some sort of riot went through the crowded area. A biscuit tin was acquired and used as the plinth for the base, building up a soil texture with sculpting, putty and positioning the mech as well as the figures in a way that would move what sort of communication is occurring between the characters. And the act of the mech holding up a lunchbox or a Japanese bento box with some chopsticks sitting on top conveys a story that the girl's giving it to the old man or the old man's handing it back, something on the lines of that. The base setting is as follow of building it with putty, coating it in PVA glue and sand, and then airbrushing multiple tones and weathering it with pigment wash and snow pigment. Everything received once thoroughly dried, multiple layers of a matte finish to blend the texture of everything together. The video does lay this whole process out in a 3-set process with a bit of forethought, design and 3D printing, but it was all a mess that just somehow weaved itself together at the very end, particularly for the painting stage. Once each component was dry and hardened over a few days of sitting around, it was all put together with PVA glue and a few days to dry and lose that glossy luster. This concluded in the finished diorama as we see right now, purely out of scrap resin I don't really want, that doesn't do super fine prints, putty, and a ton of work and a lot of fun. Just thinking out of a diorama plan and multiple characters interacting, that's whatever I could find, and scaling was a lot of fun, and not being restricted to what scale models or figures that I would have to buy or chop up and mix and match. This definitely makes a piece that is fairly unique and stood out from the rest, but not quite up to the quality of the very best that was in the paint on plastic competition. I'm still very happy with the effort put out and would stand by as the best I could do at the time, around August, September 2019. When I do some of my larger diorama builds for the Gunpla Builders World Cup, or utilising a lot of multimedia to produce a shape and a finish that's absolutely desirable, 3D printing with filaments really got large basic shapes to detail further, and diorama components. This one definitely takes it to a whole new level, and with casting and making molds and whatnot, we can definitely overrun and play in the realm of no 3D printing rules in some of these competitions. I can see with the use of this detail and medium, it can push my favoritism of multimedia and playing quite heavily in chopping up existing scale models to continue and doing far more complex and creative builds in 2020. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed this video patching everything together. Frankenstein or rat rod jobs is something I thoroughly enjoy from time to time, but it is fairly resource and time heavy, hoping to be able to do more sometime in the future. Catch out all the social media links down below in the description section, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for more.